Okay, so this is the reading circle for day 2 of Arras. I'm Cameron. The rest of them can introduce themselves.
I'm Erin.
I'm Shaylin.
I'm Anna.
Aline.
So just to get us started, the philosopher we're going to be talking about is John Arras. Here's a picture of him. He lived from 1945 to 2015, and in that span is where we got most of his beliefs and his theories. So the main idea of John Arras's whole argument is that morality isn't based on duty or consequences like we've been told in the past by other philosophers and theorists, but rather it's based on a combination of details of moral relevance to a specific situation. And we'll explain that in way more depth in the next few slides. So just to get started on casuistry in general, it's also known as case ethics. And a quote that we got from the reading itself, it creates a bridge between the general principles that guide moral decision making, as the universal theorists studied, and then the particular details that are relevant to the individual agent and recipient in the case we are considering, which was the philosophers. So the good thing about casuistry is that it's not dependent on context. It's kind of just like a set of moral beliefs that are laid out. And so that's how it differs a lot from other things we've studied. You know, it's not, you know, you look at the consequences and you decide if this is moral based on the consequences or not, or if it's your duty or not. It's just right or wrong, plain and simple.
And I think like one thing that might make a difference with, or like something about casuistry that stands out from the other philosophies that we've previously spoken about, is that it seems like the different situations, they like build on each other. So they're different, but they're relevant. So it kind of like takes one situation and then down the line when something similar happens, they kind of compare the two, and then they all seem to like build on each other a lot, which we'll discuss further as we discuss the process of it as well.
So next is talking about moral relevance, and this is making a difference in the ethical outcome of a situation. And so in the book, it like gave an example of 2 kids drowning and then an adult man who was like on the beach and he couldn't swim. But then it went on to describe the 2 drowning children, and it was describing like a boy in a blue swimsuit and then a girl who was in a red swimsuit. And then the boy was closer to the shore, whereas the girl was farther from the shore. And so what we considered to be relevant information in the situation was that the man couldn't swim and that one was closer to the shore and one was farther from the shore. But what wasn't really relevant was like what color the boy was wearing and what color the girl was wearing.
And then you also just have to put them in a different situation where like, if like a mom came up and asked like, oh, like what color swimsuits are they wearing, then that's where something like that would be relevant, because the mom would like need to know if that's her child or not. So like when you get it into different scenarios, like the relevance of stuff can change.
Yeah. Like what they were talking about, because it's like, say if you were to hear this story and you at first hear that 2 children were drowning, and then all you get out of it is that the man saved the boy and the man did not try to save the girl, you'll be like, that you'd be upset when you first hear those details. But if the morally relevant details are also included, when you hear the man couldn't swim, so he saved the boy who was closer to the shore, but did not save the girl because she was farther out and he couldn't get to her because he couldn't swim. That's how the moral relevance of those details come into play with this particular situation.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going off of that, I remember in the reading it said a lot about like just statistics of a situation. So like, you know, if the man saves the boy and lets the girl die, that's 2 people living, 1 person dying, you know? Or if he saved the boy and then went out to try to save the girl, but he drowned and the girl drowned, you know, 1 person saved, 2 dead. Or, you know, he just doesn't save any of them, they're both dead, he's still alive. So I think kind of going off of what Anna said, having these details that are of moral relevance really helps, like with the outcome, to look back and say, oh, that's why this happened, rather than just looking at the numbers of, you know, who survived and who didn't.
So when it comes to the process of casuistry, in the reading, it touched upon why or how these case ethics apply greatly to, say, like med ethics, because it's used a lot in medical cases, like where it's kind of like it allows things to improve with time. Because the first step is morphology, where it's like you assess your current situation. And the taxonomy allows you to categorize with similar previous case situations. Like, say, if you had a case study where there was a patient who didn't have insurance, and the hospital was still trying to find a way to help him. And say, like with the first case, maybe something could have gone better, but they weren't able to identify it in time. But the following future cases, if there's something similar where there's a patient who didn't have insurance, they can refer back to that previous case and then say, oh, this is one way that we can make it work better this time around. And then the final step is the kinetics of the current situation, where during the comparison of those two cases, they might not be completely identical. Maybe there's something from that first case that doesn't necessarily apply to the current one. So it's like you kind of need to pick and choose, well, not pick and choose, need to correctly identify and correlate the things that are relevant and will help the current situation that you're in. And that's where the kinetics come into play. Then, as the name suggests, it's in motion. So you're able to kind of like work in the moment, but again, building off of your previous experiences to allow for a better outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And the example like question that was in the reading was, you know, a bunch of different children's stories. And it was like, which one of these, you know, is the kinetic step of casuistry? And I think we all agreed that it's definitely the Goldilocks and the Three Bears story, because like Anna was just saying, it's about like development and like adaptation and improvement. And so kind of just going off of that story, you know, she starts with the porridge and then she changes it a little bit and then changes it a little bit more, you know, to try to make it better and better. And I think that's what casuistry is in general. It's just trying to, you know, not necessarily fix mistakes, but, you know, if you had made a mistake, it would be fixing it, or even just improving on what you've done in the past to make it work better and to make more moral decisions in general.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think like a lot of times in situations that are similar to one another, people take parts from those situations to like try to fix like what didn't go great the first time that they tried fixing it, and like they try to make it better. And so like, I think that's what this is talking about.
Mm-hmm. And then I just thought of another example of a way to explain this process. So for me, one of my favorite people who I consider, he is a philosopher, is actually Bruce Lee. And one of his famous quotes is, apply what is useful, discard what is useless, and then make it your own. So I think that that kind of applies here, because it's like you need to take what already exists and take out of that what applies to you, but then you want to discard the things that aren't going to really help you grow or evolve. And then with the kinetics, you need to make it your own. Like, take those previous things, make it a part of yourself, and then make something new out of it. So I think that that's one thing that's like interesting about this case, or these case ethics, is that it takes stuff from the past and you apply it to what's currently happening, and it kind of allows for something to become even better than what it previously was.
And then we have criticism of casuistry, and it is an open texture, so there's always room for interpretation by people of the moral decisions to fill in some of the gaps and like your ethical thinking. So like if you think differently than somebody else, then like that's fine. There's room for that in this theory. And then it relies strongly on intuition and technically an advantage, but causes a lack of consistency that a desirable ethical should provide.
Yeah, so kind of just going off of that, open texture in general is just kind of stating that, you know, everyone interprets a situation differently. And so moral and ethical decisions in general are going to vary from person to person, and deciding what's morally relevant is going to vary from person to person. So kind of just going back to the situation with the man on the beach, you know, in his case, he's saying, you know, I can't swim, the boy's closer, the girl's farther away, I'll probably save the boy. But, you know, if it was a different person, they might say, you know, I can't swim, but I'm willing to risk my life to save both of these children, you know? So it just kind of depends on who's involved in the situation, because everyone's going to interpret it differently. And then again, it does state in the reading that this criticism can kind of be seen as an advantage, just like in general, because it involves for like more expanded thinking, just like throughout society in general. But then again, it does cause that lack of consistency. And it seems that throughout like this whole semester, as we've been learning about these different theories, it seems that like consistency is kind of a common factor. Like when we talked about, you know, natural laws or human laws, it was just stuff that's all like consistent throughout humans in general. And this is definitely like an element of casuistry that it's not consistent throughout all people. So that's what makes it a little bit less desirable in general.
And I feel like it's also really hard like for these to be consistent, because like everyone really does have different ethical thinking. So like even trying to like make it consistent is like almost impossible with like everybody's like thinking different of things.
Yeah, and I agree. And then it's kind of interesting because, again, the way how you approach the situation or look at it, I think can make a big difference. And on one side of the coin, where you take building off of a previous situation and improving it, it could also affect like the morality of it, I suppose, because in the reading, it also talked about how this can influence situations in like a legality sense, like in a courtroom, like when the judge makes a decision, he also has to refer back to legal precedents. And so it's kind of like if a legal precedence may have in the time worked out, but then in the future, it might not be morally relevant, or it might not be as appropriate as it was then. So depending on how that person approaches like making a decision or arguing a case, they could either take like that precedence that worked then but is not so appropriate now, but if they like wanted to twist it in their own way, it could present problems, which would go along with the criticism of the case ethics by arguing about this open texture aspect of it.
All right, so then moving on to the questions that we had from the article discussion. We just kind of put the questions down here because we wanted everyone to be able to give their 2 cents and their opinion on the answer. So for the first question, it was, is the second step of casuistry, taxonomy, truly essential? And I guess I'll go first with answering. I believe that taxonomy is, in my opinion, almost the most important step of casuistry, just because that's the step where you pick out what's important between like your current situation and you can compare it to stuff in the past. Because I see it kinetics being more as like the moving forward, comparing and then adjusting your current situation to reflect that past situation. But I think taxonomy is where you're really comparing the two and thinking, this is what I did then, this is what's going on now, how should I move forward? And then that's how you get into kinetics. So I think without taxonomy, you wouldn't be able to move forward, you wouldn't be able to compare it to past situations. So I think it's definitely an essential step.
I agree because like if you don't take things like from the past and you're just gonna like repeat the same things that you did before. And so like if you take something that didn't work before, you're just gonna have the same like outcome. So like if you take things that worked and didn't work, then you're gonna have a different outcome and it's probably gonna be better than what was before.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that the taxonomy step is essential because if you're not taking the time and the reflection to look back, whether the action was something of your own or something that's just been done in the past, whether it's at a hospital or in the courtroom or just in history, it's like the famous saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So the part of taxonomy is being able to identify relevant past experiences and being able to compare it to the current situation, which because that's part of, I thought it was interesting that they even called this step taxonomy because from like a biology standpoint, taxonomy is the classification of like biological life, like when you group animals together by like species or different classes, that's taxonomy of it. So that's how I kind of related to that step, was being able to categorize like the different situations and finding what was similar or related
I like how
with
you,
those situations.
because like if you think about it, taxonomy really is like the most important because as you said, like you'll just like remake those mistakes if you don't like think about that step the most.
Totally agree that it's like you learn like if you burn your hand from touching the kettle, would you go and touch it again? No. So you have to learn from your previous mistakes and so you don't have to repeat again and again in your life. So
And I guess something that just coming from this conversation, I have like to build on this question. We were talking about how important this step is. Do you guys think it's the most important, or do you think that morphology or kinetics would be even more important? Because the morphology would be like seeing your situation, and then taxonomy is classifying it with a previous situation. But the kinetics part of it, being able to discern what's useful and what isn't out of those situations that you're comparing, that's what allows you to improve what happened previously. So do you guys think that taxonomy is like the most important part?
I think that taxonomy and kinetics are actually kind of like equally important, because I think definitely like kinetics is important just based off the fact, you could have taxonomy and you can categorize and compare situations all day, but if you don't know how to move with it and like adjust your current situation to either fix a mistake or improve from a past decision, then it's kind of pointless. But then again, if you were to like skip taxonomy and go straight to kinetics, you'd have nothing to move forward from. You wouldn't be comparing it to anything. So I think they kind of go hand in hand almost. So
Yeah.
I think they're both equally important. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of put it in a good way. It's a little bit like a chicken or the egg situation. It's hard to like compare, like it is hard to compare, but I think that it's also important to like, have those discussions.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so then do we want to move on to number 2? Okay, so question number 2 is, what is the difference between past theories we've discussed in comparison to Arras's views? So I kind of touched on this earlier, like throughout the PowerPoint. Even just in the main idea, I said, Arras's views, he doesn't base his morality off of consequences or duty or anything like the past theorists and philosophers we've talked about. He really looks at, the moral relevance and the just like the interpretation of each person. So it's definitely different in that way. It's, like I said, way more up to interpretation, and it's definitely different from person to person, and it can change drastically.
Yeah, that open texture of this philosophy really kind of differentiates from the previous ones, and also kind of like what you touched on is that with the other philosophers, for the vast majority, it was kind of like taking a broad concept and then taking the like from the situation, taking that concept and assessing it. Whereas this one gets very specific with the particulars of each situation. It's very, you know, unique to it. And so it's interesting that even though you take the specifics of a situation, depending on how you look at it, it also has open interpretation. So it's just interesting to me that something could get pretty specific, but also still have that openness as well.
So in conclusion, principle of relevance thus explains what binds the case together and how the meaning of one case points beyond itself towards the resolution of subsequent cases. Also, moral agent, which is like a being who can act morally due to the cognitive sense of right or wrong. The examples from our reading stated that the man is the agent, and the two recipients are the girl and the boy, who simply does not change the outcome of our ethical analysis. And then the detail about the relationship between the man and the two individual children is actually relevant to some moral theories, which is ethics of care, but not relevant to others. Arras also stated that casuistry helps us to find agreement about cases when we disagree about the reasons for our shared judgment. Also, he actually stated that the objections of casuistry is not self-critical enough, starts with our initial beliefs. We may not able to progress beyond them. It is conservative, that we do not want to make any changes. And the last one is reasoning by analogy is too intimidating. Yeah. That's all.
Yeah, I think that you worded that really well. Kind of summed it up pretty nicely about Arras's main points and kind of covering the principle of everything. And I also just thought it was good that Arras also like kind of touched on the objections of his own beliefs in that last part that you talked about.
Should we end it now? Okay, thank you guys for listening.